You know, when you think about the platforms that run our lives, it's easy to assume there was some grand plan, right? But what if the opposite is true? What if the real danger wasn't a bad plan, but the fact that there was no plan at all? Well, today we're going to dive into some fascinating research that makes that exact case.
So let's just think about the central puzzle of Facebook for a second. A year after it was created, Mark Zuckerberg was still calling it a simple utility, just a tool. And yet, look at what happened. It completely reshaped our world. So what gives? Was this all some secret master plan? Or did it just happen? To even begin to answer that, we've got to look at the most common theory for big tech's power, the one you've probably heard a million times.
And that's this idea, right, that these platforms are basically a new kind of social engineering.
Yeah, we hear that term thrown around a lot, social engineering. And it paints this picture of these Silicon Valley founders as, I don't know, modern-day puppet masters, right? Intentionally trying to build a brand new society based on their grand vision. But is that really what was happening?
Because see, when academics talk about social engineering, they're talking about something really specific. They mean these massive, top-down, state-led projects. Think about building a whole new capital city like Brasilia out of nothing, or the massive communist revolutions of the 20th century. These were huge, authoritarian projects driven by some kind of utopian and, often catastrophic vision for humanity.
And this is where it gets really interesting, when you actually compare the two side by side. Traditional social engineering, for all its massive flaws, at least claimed it wanted to improve humanity. It had this big, moral vision, and it was dealing with messy, complicated, real-world society. But platforms? The goal was never some grand utopia, it was just to maximize profit. The vision wasn't social, it was purely technical. Optimize this thing called the social graph. And the raw material wasn't society, but the digital data they could pull from society. So you see, the comparison really starts to fall apart.
Okay, so this brings us to the big twist. If that social engineering label doesn't really fit, then what's going on? We need a totally new way to think about what happened.
Now, you've probably heard the classic defense from inside the tech world, right? It's the whole good intentions gone wrong thing. The idea that, hey, we were just trying to connect the world and, oops, things accidentally went sideways. But the source material for today's explainer, it argues that that view is, well, let's just say it's way too generous. And here's the core of their argument. The researchers say this wasn't about good intentions or even bad intentions. It was about having no intentions for society at all. None. There was no grand plan, no social blueprint, no vision for what the world should look like. There was just a technical problem to solve and a business to build.
And this is where they introduce their key concept, socially blind engineering. It's the idea of building these world-changing systems with a deliberate, almost willful blindness to what they might do to society. It's like treating the actual social world as if it's an empty space with no people, no cultures, no history that you need to worry about.
So that's the theory, socially blind engineering. It's a pretty big claim, right? So where's the evidence? Well, to find it, the researchers went straight to the source. They dug into Facebook's own foundational documents.
And we're not talking about public statements or fluffy interviews. Nope, they went deep into the legal DNA of the platform itself. We're talking about 133 foundational patents that were filed in those supercritical early years, between 2004 and 2011. I mean, these are literally the technical blueprints that show you exactly how the system was built to seed the world.
And check out the kind of language they found. This quote is from one of those early patents. It's describing our entire social world in these purely computational terms. You, me, our friends, our family, our interests, our actions, we're all just nodes and edges in a giant database. It's so dry, so technical, and just completely stripped of any real human meaning.
So that just begs the question, right? If this is how the system is designed to see the world, what does that assume about us, about our social lives? Well, the research has found 3 fundamental assumptions that were baked right into the code from day one.
Okay, these are the 3 pillars of what they call Facebook's socially blind engineering: ontological plasticity, probabilistic normativity, and simulated sociality. Now, I know, those sound like super academic $50 words, so let's break down what they actually mean in plain English.
First up, we have ontological plasticity. All this really means is that the basic building blocks of our social lives, people, actions, relationships, were treated as if they were completely flexible, like clay. For example, in the patents, a message isn't just a message. It can be defined as an edge that connects two people, but hey, it can also be defined as a node all by itself that other things can connect to. And why do this? It's simple. Because if you treat social reality this way, it makes it infinitely bendable for one single goal: extracting the most profitable data possible.
Okay, next up is probabilistic normativity. This one is all about how the system deals with really complex social and moral questions. Things like, what's relevant content? What counts as a real account? What's objectionable? Instead of using any kind of fixed human principles or values, all these questions get turned into math problems. They're just defined by probabilities and numbers that can be tweaked and adjusted constantly. Not to make a better or safer community, but simply to maximize user engagement, which, of course, maximizes profit.
And the third one is simulated sociality. And wow, this one really gets to the core of it. The patents show that human interaction wasn't viewed as a genuine connection between people. It was seen as a simulation that could be engineered and manipulated. So you might think you're just reaching out to a friend you haven't heard from in a while. But behind the scenes, one patent describes this with a pretty chilling phrase: an intervention scheme designed to reactivate a dormant user. Your very human impulse to connect is being used as a lever to achieve a hidden business goal.
So, okay, when you put those three things together, the idea that social reality is totally flexible, that morality is just a math problem, and that human connection is a simulation to be engineered, you start to get a pretty bleak picture. And the researchers have this really powerful historical metaphor to wrap it all up.
And that concept is terra nullius. It's Latin, and it means nobody's land. Now, historically, this was the legal idea that colonizers used to claim that huge territories were empty, even though, people had been living there for thousands of years. It was a way to justify freely mapping, claiming, and exploiting a place for its resources.
And this is the central analogy of the entire caper. The argument is that Facebook's engineers treated our rich, complicated social world, your life, my life, all of it, as if it were a terra nullius, an empty, uninhabited frontier, a space with no people, no history, no culture, just a massive unclaimed territory that was ripe for data extraction and essentially colonization for profit. And that brings us to the final, and honestly, maybe the most chilling part of this whole argument. What is the real danger of this socially blind way of building things?
So the key takeaway here isn't that this was intentional evil. It wasn't some mustache-twirling villain plotting to remake society. Instead, the source connects it to what the philosopher Hannah Arendt famously called the banality of evil. It was more like a banal recklessness, a bureaucratic process that was focused only on solving technical problems and optimizing a system, while being completely, utterly indifferent to the massive social consequences.
And really, that's the ultimate point. The incredible, world-changing power of this technology didn't come from having a bad vision for society. It came from having no vision for society at all. It was this social blindness, this willful disregard, that allowed a simple utility to completely re-engineer our lives in such a profound way without anyone ever really having to be responsible for what happened.
Look, this whole story about the early days of social media is more than just history. It's a huge warning sign. Because today, we are building systems that are orders of magnitude more powerful, from recommendation algorithms to generative AI. And that leaves us with this really urgent question that we all have to grapple with. If the code is written without any vision for society, whose vision is going to fill that void?